Today, my guest is Professor Julian Birkinshaw. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Julian as a person, then Professor Birkinshaw is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. So for the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and only give you a very quick snapshot. Julian is a fellow of the British Academy, Academy of Social Sciences, Academy of International Business, and he was ranked 39, number 39 in 2013, number 42 in 2015, number 46 in 2017 in the top global management thinkers list. He was the winner of the Beckert Award for the best paper in Sloan Management Review in 2014, the JIBS Decade Award in 2009, AMR Best Paper Award in 2008. He also won the Barry Richmond Best Doctoral Dissertation Award in '96. And he is regularly quoted in international media outlets, including CNN, BBC, Economist, the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and the Times. Thank you, Julian, for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
My first question always is, what did you want to become when you were a child?
So I did a degree in geology. So obviously, I had these thoughts about going into the world of geological science. I'm not quite sure exactly what I thought that was going to yield, but it was of interest as a kid. But I think whilst I was doing my geology degree, I decided I was going to be in the world of business. My first job out of university was actually information technology consulting. And I only found my way into academia almost by accident, so I'll be quite honest. I mean, in terms of I did an MBA at the Ivey school in Canada. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do after that. So I actually literally just stayed at Ivey to do a PhD because it sounded like a kind of an interesting option. So I found my way into academia by mistake. It was the best mistake I ever made, but it was not in any way a conscious choice.
What's something not many people know about you that you wouldn't list on your CV?
Something that I wouldn't list on my CV in terms of my life or in terms of the world of business. I mean, I'll be honest with you that there are several things I've published which I've taken off my CV because they are not the sort of journals that people would talk about so much anymore. I've taken off my dedicated investment in my physical fitness because people would probably think that I spend too much time out running and biking to be good for my academic career. So there's probably a few other things like that don't find their way onto my CV, which actually take up a lot of my time.
If you stop doing what you're doing today, what would be your second best alternative career path?
I mean, I'm now of an age where I could retire, right? I mean, I'm not planning to retire ever, but I think I could still imagine myself as a business person, actually just literally running a small company or something like that. But actually retiring and becoming a full-time athlete would be too strong a word, but living up in the mountains and spending my time in the mountains, skiing, running, biking, doing triathlons, I could actually quite enjoy that as well. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I do triathlons for fun in my spare time.
For fun?
Yeah. For fun. Well, everyone's got their own favorite activities, but yeah, I do triathlons and I'd love to do a really long triathlon one day. I haven't done that yet. So I could imagine just giving up writing and academia and going and living up in the mountains. That would be kind of fun.
Super interesting. If I could take a cab, I would just take a cab. I would not even want to walk, but clearly there's a difference. Yeah. So let's talk about regrets. What is the one thing you wish you would have done that you didn't?
Regrets. Well, I'm grappling. I'm struggling now because, of course, when your life has worked out well, it's very difficult to regret anything that you did. I mean, I could have lived in more places, if you see what I mean. So where have I lived in my life? I was brought up in the UK. I spent 6 years in Canada. I spent 3.5 years in Sweden. And then I came back to the UK, and I've been in the UK now for 20 years. And I've never lived in Asia. I've never even lived in the States. So I could imagine that if I could have done things a bit differently, another period of time in a different part of the world would have been kind of fun.
What are you most proud of?
Apart from my kids, that I guess everyone says they're kids, right? In terms of, let me focus on my professional career, because I don't want to choose between family and profession. What am I most proud of in terms of my professional career? It is that I have managed to continue to publish academically rigorous research, as well as articles in Harvard Business Review and books for managers. And I've managed to keep juggling both of those balls, because, many people do one of them and many people do the other. And it's very difficult, actually, as an academic who's been around a long time, to continue to play both games. So for me, that is what I'm most proud of.
And what are you most passionate about?
Look, I'm most passionate nowadays about actually making an impact, and I mean that broadly. But I do believe that impact, as a business school professor, is about what you achieve in the business world. In other words, your ability to influence the practice of management, the practice of business. Now, whether you do that directly in terms of helping companies to work better, or whether you do that through your students who then subsequently, make an impact, I don't mind. But I actually am now of the view that is where my energy will go. And so I want to, it's not that I'll stop writing academic articles, but I want to make sure that I prioritize doing things that actually shapes the practice of management. And that requires staying very close to what's happening. It requires bringing to bear a lot of these sort of the apparatus and the concepts from the academic world, but bringing those to the world of business and trying to be creative about how to shape that world of practice. Yeah, that's what I'm passionate about.
Thank you. Now let's talk about research. And to a layman, how would you describe what you work on? So if you were to summarize your research to people who are not really the audience.
Yeah. So if I was to talk to a friend who I've known for years, who doesn't really know anything about what I do, I would say that I attempt to help mostly large established companies stay relevant and vibrant and innovative, because it's a well-known fact that a lot of big established companies ossify. They lose their way. They may not go bankrupt like Kodak, but they lose their way. They become mature. They become slow moving. And for 25 years, I have researched various aspects of helping those companies to revitalize themselves, to be entrepreneurial and to be innovative.
I'm curious, why didn't you think about small companies on the other hand and focus on the large ones?
Yeah, and of course, in terms of where I started, I started studying subsidiaries of multinationals in Canada back in the mid 90s. And that was the phenomenon I found interesting at that point. And that led me down a track of studying in various ways the things that big multinationals do to remain entrepreneurial. Now, at various points along the way, I've absolutely become interested in, and indeed done research on, much smaller companies. I do some work on entrepreneurial ecosystems in London. I've done a few studies of startup companies. And, I could absolutely see myself trying to provide more advice, if you like, to startups. But in fact, what I've always ended up falling back on was like taking insights about how startup companies work, what makes them vibrant, what makes them hungry, and kind of injecting that thinking back into the world of big companies. And so that is, I mean, it's not that I couldn't look at startup companies, but I guess I always come back to, this is really the essence of what makes companies tick: entrepreneurship and enterprise and innovation. And I think there's a much bigger problem to solve in some ways in taking that stuff into the world of big companies.
From your window, how did the culture of IB scholars evolve over time? And do you see this as a fruitful evolution? What did we lose? What did we gain along the way?
Well, look, I'm going to be honest with you, which is that I identify as an international business scholar. I always have done. I mean, the AIB has always been my first community. But nowadays, I'm moving away from international business research per se. And partly that's me, but it's also partly a reflection of how I see the field going. Because the trouble is that AIB, international business scholarship, has defined itself in terms of the international dimension of business per se, whether that's, cross-border, trading relationships, whether it's multinational subsidiary relationships, whether it's cross-cultural management stuff. And whilst, of course, this stuff is still important, of course it is. For me, when I study what makes big companies tick, they are no longer talking about the international aspect of it as much as they are talking about other aspects. And so my interests have moved away from international as such. And I do worry that I'm not alone in that. I'm worried that the state of play in the world of making sense of business is no longer actually around the international aspects of a business as much as it used to be. And as a result, I do worry that IB as such, as a kind of an area of research, has become a little bit sort of stuck in a corner. And that's a concern for the field of international business. It's not a concern so much for the business people as such, because by definition, they are focusing what's most important to them. But I do worry for scholarship in IB.
So, if IB is stuck in the corner, let's just expand on that thing.
Sure.
Is it because we're omitting some variables in research, or is it because we have overdone something and people don't see the benefit to it anymore?
I think that we've overplayed the importance of the international dimensions of business to the phenomena I'm interested in. And of course, I'm not going to try to speak for everybody. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can speak to the agenda of the executives running big multinational companies, right? Because those are the people I speak to. And they, of course, they're worried about the whole deglobalization movement. But if you say, what are the things that keep them awake at night? Number one on that list, and I'm setting aside COVID, because obviously COVID is a huge issue in the year 2020, but it will hopefully become a smaller issue in 2021. So setting that aside, number one issue, arguably is the overall sustainability of business in the world looking forward. And if you are, in the world of energy or in the world of automobiles, the energy transition is huge. And if you're in any other, broadly related aspects of the world of business, this issue about sustainability is huge. So if that's number one issue, number two issue, not far behind, is digitization, the whole transformation of business along digital lines, the disruption of business by digital native companies. And I would say every industry, to varying degrees, is being affected by this. And if you think about those two as the biggest trends that keep executives awake, there is an international dimension to them, but actually that's not what drives them. In other words, sustainability is a planetary issue. Digitization is a technological issue. And when those things get discussed, the issues of what countries people are in are secondary to the much bigger question about, what does carbon neutral look like? What does digital transformation look like? Hopefully you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's not that international will ever be irrelevant. It's just not as relevant as the other things that keep chief executives awake.
When I was talking to Jay Barney, he said,
Yeah.
you know, when he was a student, he would go to the Yale library, he would just pick up random books and he would read. And it's, that's when the mind thinks freely, like wanders freely. Like, what
Exactly.
does your mind think of when it wanders freely?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm fairly kind of problem focused. In other words, I do like to stay on a topic. And at the moment, for example, I'm working on a book on digital disruption, and actually, it's not on digital disruption as a threat. It's more of a, you know, it's almost a correction against overplaying digital disruption. But when I'm trying to kind of get insights about how to address that phenomenon, I do try to build on, you know, broader bodies of research outside of the traditional realms of business. So I want to pick up on, you know, philosophy, and I want to pick up on, you know, economic geography. I want to pick up on I don't know, complexity theory, complexity science, and in varying ways, I see one of my roles as trying to bring some of this body of research into the way we look at the business world. So, if, for example, a hot topic today is resilience, you know, business resilience is a big topic today. You know, my mind immediately goes to, well, what does resilience look like to the human race? What makes a human body resilient to, you know, infection? What is it that makes some groups, collectives of people resilient? And that takes you down a track of you know, of anthropology and of understanding the origins of human beings. It takes you into the worlds of biology. And I always enjoy playing with these almost metaphorical ways of looking at the world of business to try to bring new insights to bear.
I'm curious, when you talked about business resilience,
Yeah.
Some things are happening in England.
Yeah.
Brexit is happening. They are
Yeah.
looking at the world differently from the European Union split.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, good question. And you won't be surprised to know I think that Brexit is a disaster. I mean, it's a self-inflicted wound of remarkable consequences. And it is going to happen. And at the time when we're recording this, we're negotiating, you know, the trade deal, which hopefully will at least minimize the disruption. I mean, what is going on is, and this has been well talked about, right, is a reaction to the global movement, a reaction to inequalities in society, not unlike the whole Donald Trump phenomenon we saw in the US. We can now put that behind us. And we are seeing, unfortunately, that reaction against inequality and, you know, falling behind of many northern parts of the UK. We're seeing that manifested in a cry of frustration, which has then required, unfortunately, the UK to, you know, close ranks a little bit and to put up barriers. And it will be corrected, undoubtedly, but will that correction take 5 or 10 years, or will it take 50 years? I just do not know. And unfortunately, we're having to live with the consequences, and our children are having to, you know, accept the fact that they won't be able to be citizens of Europe. And it's very frustrating, quite honestly, but that is the way the world has gone.
I mean, things are things are changing rapidly.
Yeah.
Not because of COVID, like you said, but
Yeah.
the philosophy of business is changing.
Yeah.
Deglobalization is something, nationalistic movement is something, patriotism is something. And UK is one of the countries at the forefront of these changes. And they are probably the first in Europe to pull back.
Yeah.
And there is something to really think about. Like you said, this is interesting. I've written down business resilience, which I haven't thought about before.
Yeah.
we're seeing something unfold in front of us.
That's right.
For very new. I don't know. Advice. Let's talk about advice and you as a mentor.
Okay, fine. I mean, I'm very happy to talk about business resilience further, but perhaps we should move on to the final topic.
For people starting new into the field, IB or strategy, international strategy, what are the type of skills that they should have? What are the mistakes that you made that they shouldn't do?
Yeah. Well, look, when I got my PhD, it was still possible to graduate and get a job without having strong econometric quantitative skills. And I'm not sure that is true today. So my advice to anybody who wants to embark on this career is that, for better or for worse, there has been an escalation, if you like, in the arms race around methods, and everybody knows that. And it's just important to accept the fact that in order to be a successful academic these days, the bar in terms of econometrics and methodological sophistication is just a whole lot higher than it ever was when I got my PhD. So, if I had my time again, I would have invested a bit more time in becoming a real master of those methods, because, I'm not joking with you. I no longer have the skills that are required econometrically to get into the top journals. The only way I can do that nowadays is actually through co-authors who have those skills. I mean, I've still got, obviously, all the skills in terms of framing and research knowledge and asking interesting questions, but I do need people to help me unless I'm writing a purely qualitative piece of research. So my advice is very simple. On the one hand, you've got to get that skill set, the skills that allow you to be in the game. But then, and this is important, do not pretend that that is a necessary set of tools to be a successful academic, because it is not. The skills that get you noticed in the world of academia is asking the smart questions, is absolutely, picking up on ideas and phenomena and questions that everybody else is somehow ignoring. And throughout my entire academic career, one piece of advice that I would give to myself is, just keep on asking about the things that other people are ignoring. When I studied for my doctoral thesis all these years ago, I studied entrepreneurship in subsidiary companies of multinationals. And I still remember going to conferences in 1992 and 93 saying, I want to study entrepreneurial subsidiary managers. And people were scratching their heads and saying, well, why would you do that? I mean, what's the literature on that? Why would anyone be an entrepreneur if they're working in a subsidiary company? And I said to myself, well, maybe they're right. But actually, I know for a fact that there are subsidiary managers out there who are thinking exactly in these terms. And so for me, the disconnect between what I was seeing in the field and what the literature was talking about was the research opportunity. That was the arbitrage opportunity that actually I was able to exploit and turn into a research project. So that's the thing that they should never lose, in addition to building that set of tools and techniques around research methods and statistics.
I mean, we talked about creation of new ideas before, but what do you think about how to sell new ideas? How do you sell
them? Yeah, so it's difficult, right? I have many times written papers that got rejected. Of course I did. I mean, literally hundreds of papers have been rejected in my career. And often some of my most successful papers were rejected 3 or 4 times before I was finally able to find the right angle for them. So actually my most cited paper ever, it wasn't an IB paper actually, it was a paper on ambidexterity in Academy of Management Journal. And the ambidexterity framing was not in that paper when it was first written. It was a paper about, I can't remember exactly, strategic alignment or adaptability. And it was only in the review process that the ambidexterity framing became part of what we actually put into the final version of that paper. So how do you sell your ideas? You try on a number of different frames. I mean, I can't say it any simpler than that. You know, you sometimes get lucky straight away, but much more often than not, what you have to do is to try something and you see what happens and it gets rejected and you try something else. And eventually you hit on an angle that works. And it's always that combination of, it's what's called optimal distinctiveness. In other words, it has to be related to something that's already out there, but it has to be unique at the same time. And getting that balance right between uniqueness and relatedness is what's hard.
Well, what is one question that I should have asked you but didn't?
So that is a terrific question. I mean, you could have asked me for a little bit more on, I guess, you know, how I chose my topics, my research topics, how my research evolved over the years.
So there we go.
There you go. But in some ways, I've sort of answered that question because I've always been interested, as I said, in what makes big companies almost, what makes them tick, what makes them act like small companies. And I've always kind of been interested in that dualism between company strategy and individual leader behavior, if you see what I mean. And what's happened over the years is that if that's been the kind of the common theme across 25 years of research, the theoretical perspective I've used to study that phenomenon has evolved. And it started out with the multinational headquarter-subsidiary relationship. And then I got into management innovation as a lens, innovation in how we work. And then I got into ambidexterity and the balance between exploiting and exploring. And so I've had a whole series of different theoretical lenses, and yet the actual phenomenon has stayed quite similar. There you go. So that's sort of answering my own question in terms of how I make sense of my academic career.
That's how we write a good paper.
Yeah,
you ask a question and answer it. Julian, thank you so much. This was a great candid interview. I learned a lot. I'm sure others will agree with me. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, it's been a great pleasure. I enjoyed doing it, and hopefully people will watch this and gain a few little tidbits for their own careers and for their own research agendas.
Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much.